Welcome to another night of the Adventures Explorer series. I'm Annie Robbins. I'm a manager here, and I have the pleasure of introducing Katie Davis, our speaker. She got her undergrad in wildlife ecology and Spanish from LSU, and she is now studying for a PhD in ecology and evolution at UW. Her dissertation research focuses on beavers and their impacts. Last year, she was in Argentina on a Fulbright scholarship. While there, she joined a field campaign to study penguins. This is what she'll be sharing with us tonight. Take it away.
All right, so as Annie said, last year I was on Fulbright and got to do some pretty cool things. And so today I'm just going to kind of walk through a little bit of what it was like to be on this field campaign, but I wanted to start it off by prefacing it with, this is the reason that I became a wildlife biologist. When I was a kid, the idea of getting to go to cool places and work hands-on with cool animals was the coolest thing that I could imagine, and my 5-year-old self, if she could hear the story of these things that I got to do, would probably not even believe it, because it would have been beyond her wildest dreams. I just want to start with like a little bit of context about what Fulbright is for anyone that doesn't know. So Fulbright is this international scholarship program that the State Department actually funds. And the purpose of it is to foster like a sense of like cultural ambassadorship and this like connection between countries. And so the US State Department pays to send Americans, mostly young Americans, to other countries to either teach English or do research. And in my case, I was there doing research. I went to Argentina, which for anyone that knows me, which there are a few people in here, I am married to Luis, who is from Argentina, so there was a little bit of a personal connection there. But there was also a more direct connection to the research that I've been doing for my PhD here in the US. So my PhD research here focuses on beavers and their impacts, and so this is a picture of me in the field, either in Grand Teton or Yellowstone National Parks, because those are the two places where I've done most of my field work. And I mostly look at beaver impacts on amphibian populations, but I also look at gene flow and connectivity within beavers themselves. And what you might not know is that the North American beaver was introduced to Argentina in the 1940s because someone wanted to start a fur industry, which was not a great idea. And they have very devastating impacts on the ecosystem down there. And so I went down to Argentina working on beavers. Nothing to do with penguins, but the place where I was working is called the Centro Austral de Investigaciones Científicas, which is like the Southern Center for Scientific Investigations. And this is the building that I work in, and it has this funky like Antarctic style architecture because it's based on like the designs that they use for the bases down there. It's really windy, it's up on this hilltop. But when you're working in a place like this, it's one of those situations where you're like, who are all these people around me? What do they work on? Where have they been? A lot of them have been to Antarctica. Like the guy that I was working most directly with has been to Antarctica something like I can't remember, like 16 times. While I was there, he got invited on a last minute expedition, did a 2-month circumnavigation of the entire white continent. So you meet really cool people. And one of the little seeds that I had in the back of my mind the whole time I was there was, what if I got to do penguin work? What if I could help someone out with some penguin stuff? And so if you only think of penguins in relationship to Antarctica, there's actually only 2 species that are found only in Antarctica, and those are our emperor penguins and our Adelie penguins. But there's actually like 20-something species of penguins. I don't remember the exact number, but this gives you an idea of like kind of some of the distribution of them. So they are found in South Africa, in southern Argentina and Chile. There's a species in Australia, which was actually the first species of penguin that I got to see in the wild when I was studying abroad there. And there's a species all the way up even into the Galapagos. And so down at the southern tip of Argentina, the most common species that you see are Magellanic penguins and gentoo penguins. But there's also a couple of different species of the rockhoppers, so those are the ones that have the funky little eyebrows. And you can get also the occasional king penguin, which look like emperors, but they're a little bit smaller. And so on the left here you have the breeding and wintering distribution of the Magellanic penguin, which is the one that I'm mostly going to talk about today. And so it's all about who you know. And while I was in Argentina, I met this researcher. His name is Ulises Balsam. And Ulises was actually taking a course that I was TAing for Spanish-speaking students. So my advisor teaches this international landscape genetics course, which is my specific subfield. And he was taking it, and I was just kind of like supplementing like all of the instruction in English by providing translations to Spanish when necessary. And Ulises works on birds. He mostly works on raptors. And one day I asked him, I was like, you know anyone, like you do bird stuff. Do you know anyone who does penguin stuff? And he was like, I do penguin stuff. And I was like, okay, can I come? And it was May at the time, which is going into winter in the southern hemisphere. And so he was like, okay, email me in October because that's when they come back from winter. And that's kind of like when we get off the ground. So I email him in October and he goes, oh yeah, like you can come out for some day trips, but also do you want to go on a 3-week-long expedition to an island in the middle of nowhere? And I went, can my partner come? And he goes, yeah, sure. And I was like, all right, let me ask my advisor. And so I had a meeting with my advisor and I go, can I go on a 3-week-long expedition to an island in the middle of nowhere with absolutely no cell service? And she's like, if you don't go, I won't forgive you. So the island in the middle of nowhere, to give you some context, this is the very tip of Argentina. And this is the city where we were living, Ushuaia, which is the capital of the province of Tierra del Fuego, which is this province down at the tip of Argentina. This is the island that we were going to. And so it's the little one inside of that circle that's just to the north of Isla de los Estados, which is also known as Staten Island, but that makes me think of New York, so I never use the translated name. It's from Dutch, if that makes you feel better. And so this is Isla Observatorio, and on Isla Observatorio, there's a lighthouse called the New Year Lighthouse, or Faro Año Nuevo, that was built back in like 1902. This island was really important to those historic Antarctic expeditions because people would stop here in order to calibrate all of their meteorological instruments and their compasses and things like that before they headed south. And so there's this lighthouse on Isla de los Estados that is the one that inspired Jules Verne's story, The Lighthouse at the End of the World. And this is the one that replaced it, just to put that in a little bit of a cultural context. And they've been going to this island for a lot of years to study this species, which is the striated caracara. Caracaras are related to falcons, but instead of being like typical like aerial hunters, they're more like opportunistic scavenger type species. And they've been doing a long-term study down there for a lot of years. That's what Ulises did a lot of his work on. But they were also starting a more intense monitoring program looking at the nesting success of Magellanic penguins, which are these guys in the picture, as well as looking at how often they were killed by sea lions and seals that prey on them when they come back into shore after feeding. And so this was the crew that got put together. I was not the only odd one out there. It was a very interesting group of 5 people that were all working together who barely knew one another. And so to give a little bit of context, you have down at the bottom left there, the mountain guide is Luis. So like I said, the first thing I asked was, can my partner come? And since Luis has a lot of, backcountry experience and wilderness medicine experience and stuff like that, Ulises was like, yeah, absolutely, he can come. We need more hands. The freshwater biologist up there, Maru, is a postdoctoral researcher down there in Argentina. She, mostly focuses on like freshwater quality and things like that. And she mostly came along as a favor to El Jefecito. El Jefecito is Joaquin. He was the graduate student who this is his doctoral project. We started calling him El Jefecito, which means the little boss, because at first we were calling him Jefe. And he was like, don't call me the boss, I don't like that. And it got morphed into Jefecito, and then it just stuck, and he was stuck with it. He got used to it by the end, though. He was kind of sad that we were going to stop calling him, but as soon as we got back into port. And then Joaquin's on there twice, so he's on the far right there as well. And then we have Sammy, who's a park ranger who works at, Petrified Forest National Park? Basically the same name as one of ours here in the States. And it basically would be like if someone from Petrified National Forest all the way down in Arizona decided to come up to Yellowstone to help do research. Like she lives in another province, and she came as a favor to Ulises, who is Joaquin's doctoral advisor. Ulises was not there while we were there. He went out with Joaquin 2 weeks before, and then he came back when we arrived. So, the way that you get out to this island is a 35-hour sailboat ride. The way out at first was really nice, beautiful and sunny, a little bit windy, but you're in the Beagle Channel, so it's kind of protected. But then once you get past that last little lip of the continent of South America, it gets a little bit more intense. You can hear the wind whistling there. But this video really doesn't do it justice. We spent most of the trip out there at about this angle the whole way because the sails just kind of stuck like that. We had wind in our favor, so we actually made fantastic time. But if you get seasick, absolutely would not recommend. I took some Dramamine, hopped in a cabin. I was just rolling around in my little bunk like this. But the Dramamine made me sleepy, so I just slept through most of it. But yeah, it's not the easiest ride out there. Can I get to the next slide? Come on, there we go. So this was our first view of the island on that top picture, so that we're standing on the boat there. And you see there's like a little sign down at the bottom. That's the beach that we land on, and then pretty much all around the island it goes straight up. And so we had to haul all of our gear off of the boat onto a smaller boat, take the little small motorboat over to the beach, and then climb everything up that hill. And then hike it about half a kilometer to the lighthouse, which you can just barely see is about right there. Because the lighthouse is where we were going to be living. From the island there in the bottom picture, you can see Isla de los Estados, so that's that larger island immediately to the south. One of the weird things about being in the southern hemisphere when you're from the northern hemisphere is that a lot of your weather comes out of the south, especially there where there's pretty much nothing between us besides that island until you get to Antarctica. So we would get these really cold winds coming up from Antarctica and bringing in all of the nasty weather that we would get. And then this is a little video of when we first got there. It's kind of hard to see, but the little things that are moving in the water there are penguins. It was kind of a surreal experience when we first pulled up to the island because there was just immediately so much life. There's penguins, what they call porpoising out of the water. There's a whole bunch of seabirds flying around. There were seals and sea lions in the water. Like, it just felt like we'd gotten to this place that was just absolutely exploding with life. This was our home sweet home. Oh, it did not change. Come on. Changed on my laptop. There we go, home sweet home. So this is the newer lighthouse, or Faro Año Nuevo, that I mentioned. It's kind of abandoned. The Navy is technically the ones who manage it, and so they had years where they would kind of like maintain a unit that was there most of the time, but it's been like 10 years since anyone was doing that. Thankfully, they had gotten rid of the rats, so we did not have a rat problem. But this was our home base for everything. And when I look at these pictures, it cracks me up because I remember working at the research station up in Grand Teton National Park, which if anyone's ever been, it's these really nice cabins with bunk beds, and there's a kitchen, and there's a shower, and there's running water. And I remember telling my friend who's not a biologist about that setup, and I was like, oh yeah, it's like super cushy for a field job. And my friend was like, that's cushy? And I really need to go back and show her these pictures and be like, this is what I'm comparing to, because I feel like this is more typical for some field situations. And so, yeah, you have the outside view of the lighthouse there. Luis didn't listen to the rules and went up to the very top of the lighthouse to see what things looked like up there. I was too scared to even attempt that. And then you have like kind of our living room in the top right picture there. You'll see that there's a tent set up. That's where Luis and I slept because it is a little bit chilly, and so it'd be nice and warm in the tent. As well as like all of our field gear is kind of hanging or on tables in different parts, because even though we didn't see any rats, we were really concerned about them. And then this other room was our kitchen / the bedroom for the other 3 people in the crew. So we would do all of our cooking and planning and water filtering and things along those lines in that space. And then at night they would like shove everything to the side and pull out their sleeping pads and just sleep on the floor in there. And so that was our home for 3 weeks. We took all of the food we needed with us. When we arrived, like I said, Joaquin and Ulises have been there for 2 weeks, so they'd eaten through all of their fresh food, so we brought more fresh food. Most of the dry food had been dropped off with them a couple weeks before. And we had lots of, pasta and rice and bread and, cheese and ham and like really sealed packages, a lot of things like that. So a lot of eating the same thing over time. The climate down there is not very forgiving. Most of the time it did not snow, but when we first got there, we did get this beautiful little snow, and it was like, ooh, what have we gotten ourselves into? But the rest of the time, we either had these like really nice yet very windy days, which we're very used to here in Wyoming, or it'd be 50 degrees and raining, which is a little bit miserable. But yeah, the views made up for it though. So again, like whenever you see mountains in the background of a picture, that's Isla de los Estados in the distance. Like it's this huge mountainous island compared to our tiny little 2-kilometer diameter flat island that we were on. A couple more pictures there. So going into like kind of what the research we were doing there was and what a typical day looked like, this was our map for planning everything. So Joaquin and Ulises had started this map when they got there, and we would kind of check things off as we got them done. And so we have a bit of a map of the island, and when we arrived, Joaquin was like, oh yeah, we've named all of the bays, because the bays didn't have names. And one of them was named Normandy, because, to quote, things happened there. Basically, Joaquin had seen a sea lion attack a penguin on land, as well as like a bunch of other penguin deaths, and so that one got called Normandy. Another bay was called the Bay of Death, for obvious reasons. And we have like Point Birds, where there's a ton of cormorants nesting, and like all these silly names to kind of help us orient ourselves on the island, and they're all written around the edge there. We also kept track of a bunch of different things, and so like these circles here are showing how many caracara nestlings there were in each caracara nest. Like I said, that was a long-term monitoring project that they had, and so they wanted to put bans on all of those caracara nestlings. And then over in this chart here, it's hard to see, but there's a thing that says bajadas, which means like kind of like spots where the penguins would like go into the water. And it says like high and low tide, and so we would try to go to these spots at high and low tide and do these like observation periods that I'll talk about later. And so we would kind of like end each day prepping for the next one, talking about like what on here did we still need to get done. These were our main focus. These are the Magellanic penguins. We call them a lot of times los muchachos. They are very silly little dudes. They remind me of hobbits. They live in these little cave nests, and they're about this tall, and they spend all day long yelling. If you saw some of Luis's posts about the penguins, he put the audio on the background there, and I didn't choose any videos that have that audio, but they are just screaming.
I can put the audio.
All the time. You should. They have no fear of humans really, because they're not used to having terrestrial predators. All day. Thousands of penguins, always, constantly doing that. You get used to it. But they're not very afraid of people, so you can get pretty close to them before they like start yelling at you in a more aggressive way, or like run away or hide in their cave or things like that. There will also be these like groups of like juveniles which have like very gray necks, and you'll see the juveniles like in this clump, and as you get closer they'll suddenly realize you're there and they just all scatter in different directions. And so they're really just entertaining to be around all the time. And our number one task that we had to do every day is that we had about 200 nests marked around the island, and we tried to visit half of them every day. And so we would be split, the crew would be split into two, one team of 2 and one team of 3. We would mix it up every day. We gave ourselves silly names based on what food we were eating, like what brand of cookie. So imagine if we were like on the radio with each other, like this is Team Oreo checking in with Team Chips Ahoy. Like that's basically what we were doing every day. But we would split up into these crews, and we would check about half of the nests each. And so this is Joaquin and Luis here, and this was like one of our first days when Joaquin's kind of showing us how to check a nest. He's got a nice bright flashlight there, and he's got this stick with a hook on the end. He's got this stick with a hook on the end that he kind of uses to push the adults aside and see if there's any eggs or chicks in there. And you might think, okay, that sounds like pretty straightforward, but some of these nests are deep, some of them curve at the end. Sometimes you have both parents in there, and it's really hard to see behind them. And so you might see something like this, and I'm going to tell you there's an adult right there. And you should see the chick over there. It's a little small, but you can see the chick. And so you're gonna go, oh yeah, okay, there's one chick in there. Yep, you gotta look again. Because that's a butt. So you have one chick face here and one butt there, and then an adult face there. So there's 2 chicks. So it was really a challenge to make sure that you looked as best as you could in every single nest. Hard on the knees too, you know, you're crawling down. We would wear these white suits because at first, like, there's a potential concern for avian flu. We didn't see any signs of it, but we kept using the white suits because you're throwing yourself down on your stomach to look into a cave, and right at the entrance of the cave is where the penguins poop. So you're just lying down in penguin poop every single time. So much better to protect your clothes with the little white suit. We would also every day choose a bunch of random nests to weigh the baby penguins. As you can see, this little guy's not super happy about it. This was towards the beginning, so these guys are pretty small, but they got big and outgrew that bag very quickly. But this was, again, one of our primary tasks every day that we had to do. Oh yeah, I also compare this a lot of times to like a kidnapping or like an alien abduction. It really is an alien abduction. A lot of wildlife science is like, you know, if you talk to someone who thinks they were abducted by aliens, it's like, oh, I got picked up and then they like did these things to me and then they just put me back where they found me. That's basically what we did to the penguins. So here we come in our big white suits. We just grab the adult, get it out of the way, grab their babies, weigh their babies, and then just put the babies back, and the babies are like, okay. So it's really interesting to just kind of think about that from the perspective of the animals sometimes. So these are the little guys that you'd find looking at you. These ones here are towards the end of the time that we were there. And so we were there for 3 weeks. When we arrived, I think the baby chicks were weighing about 1 kilo. When Joaquin and Odysseus got there 2 weeks before, they were about 300 grams. These guys, these chonkers, by the time we left, weighed about 3.5 kilos. which was more than my cousin's baby who was born while we were there weighed when he was born. So these guys are chonkers. Our other big task every day was to do these 3-hour observation periods. And so this is a picture you can see. Maru's in the red, and then I'm hiding here behind my backpack because I'm lounging like this with my binoculars in my hands because we're sitting there for 3 hours, often in the rain and the wind. And we're watching a spot where there's a bunch of rocks that kind of slope down into the ocean. And the penguins really like these spots for getting in and out of the water. And so we would sit there and we would count how many penguins we saw go out into the water and how many penguins we saw come back. We were also looking to see if we saw any attacks by seals or sea lions. This was one of the main objectives of the study because Joaquin wants to look at basically the contribution of carrion to like the nutrients that are present on the island. And so he was interested in seeing how, like if the penguins died on land and like who was then eating them, but then he realized that most of them are getting eaten in the water and there's these petrels that would come in and eat the scraps. We did it anyway though. We logged like 800 something hours of observation while we were there. And we tried to get every site that we were interested in at low tide and at high tide, see if there's any differences there. This is kind of what that process looks like. So you have a whole crowd of penguins, you're sitting there with your binoculars, and you have a little counter in your hand, and you are just clicking like crazy. They would usually come in like waves, and so you would have a huge group, sometimes of several hundred penguins come in, and you're just clicking the whole time, every time they pass like whatever rock you've chosen as your marker. Other times though, it'd be a bit slower, wouldn't be a lot going on, and you just watch these little personal dramas unfold. And so this picture I took here through my binoculars, there's just one penguin stuck on a rock, surrounded by water, and it was a juvenile penguin, which you can tell because he has the little gray neck. And I watched for like at least half an hour as he just walked from one end of the little rock, and was like, I can't go that way. Walked to the other end of the little rock, can't go that way. And it was just this sad little dance of this one little penguin who'd chosen the wrong spot to get up onto the island and therefore was very confused about what he was doing. I believe there's been some research that shows that they actually like find the spot where they come back to the island visually, like they recognize the coastline. And so like if they come back at a different point in the tide, they can get confused, which is how he ended up just kind of stuck there for a while. And I think our observation period ended before he figured anything out. Sometimes we had absolutely gorgeous days like this. So the drink that you see here, there's a thermos, and then the drink in the cup there is called mate. And we would just sit there and drink that for the 3-hour period that we were out there. We'd be munching on our cookies of the day. But other times it looked a bit more like this. Luis and I in that picture are absolutely soaked to the bone. It's probably 50 degrees out, probably windy, and we still had to sit there for 3 hours straight and count penguins. The end of a day typically looked like this, all of us, slowly trekking back to the lighthouse. There's one thing in this picture that I don't really have any other pictures of, but Sami there in the picture is carrying this like post that looks like a T. So for that, anytime we came across a dead animal, we would bag it and take it with us, and then Joaquin would set up a camera trap on that little post, looking at the dead animal to see who's coming and eating it. And so we have everything from the caracaras, that are feeding on dead things. You have condors that fly over from Isla de los Estados, as well as the petrels. No like terrestrial mammals though. The only terrestrial mammal that we had on the island were actually bunnies, which were introduced by the people that lived there back when the lighthouse was functioning. We oftentimes had like a bit of a lull in the afternoon because maybe high tide wasn't until like 8 p.m. or something like that, and so this would be a pretty typical scene of us back at our little field station, our lighthouse. So Joaquin there constantly with his little notebook planning, well, what's the next thing we need to do? Like, can we squeeze in something else that we need to accomplish? You can see another mate in the picture that Maru is serving and passing around to each of us. And then Sami and I were usually like doing our journals, and we had a book that was about the history of the island, and Luis was usually reading that. And so it's just kind of like a bit of a domestic scene for us. Another bit of a domestic scene, sometimes the only way to get through a day was to think about what food we were going to get when we got back home, especially if it was cold and wet. This day we basically made a fried dough, and it was delicious. It was exactly what we needed because morale was a little bit low that day. We put candles in wine bottles in order to have some fun illumination when it got dark. And we honestly got really lucky with the crew that we had. Like I said, we were kind of a bit of an eclectic crew. None of us knew each other except for Maru and Joaquin. But Ulises had just managed to find all of these people who were willing to go to an island in the middle of nowhere, and we all went into it like with like the right attitude and got along fantastically, honestly, and had a great time. We had some tasks that we had to do that weren't an everyday thing. One of them was taking blood samples from penguins. And so in this picture, you have Maru's holding a penguin there. You can see its head is pressed against her thigh, while Joaquin takes a blood sample from its foot. And that was a typical penguin. But we did have this one very, very angry penguin who did not want to cooperate, and therefore it took 4 people to get that blood sample from him. And so in this picture, you have Sammy on the left is holding its feet, Maru is holding the body and the wing, and then Luis is holding the head still while Joaquin is measuring the bill. This particular penguin just was not having it. Most of the time, once they're restrained, they're pretty calm about it, but this penguin was not. And the reason I was free to take the picture is I was in lab tech mode, handing Joaquin all the things that he needed in order to get stuff done. We also would take advantage of the fact that this is an island that is absolutely brimming with life. And so we banded a lot of other birds that are breeding in the area as well. And so these 2 pictures on the left, the top left and the bottom left there, are of skubas, which are kind of like a gull type species, but they're a bit more pelagic, so you can find them further out in the water. They are known for eating penguin eggs, for example, when they're adults. But their babies, they didn't even build nests. Their babies would just be in the middle of nowhere. And if you stumbled across a baby, you would almost step on them. And the adults would just be kind of circling above. And so we did band some of them. So that top left picture is really early on when they're really small, and there's a bit bigger down there on the bottom left. The 2 pictures in the middle, top and bottom, are of Caracara babies. So like I said, they had more of a long-term monitoring studying going on there, so we were banding those nestlings. The worst thing about banding Caracara nestlings is that their parents are much more aggressive than the skuas are. They don't just keep an eye on you, they will come at you, which I'll talk again about in a minute. Top right there are some gull babies, and then the bottom right are oyster catcher eggs. And so there's something like 20 something documented breeding species on this island. And it was one of those things where it's like every day you saw something new. You saw a new type of bird, you saw a new type of baby bird, you saw new eggs, you saw a nest in a place that you hadn't seen a nest before, and it was a lot of fun. At the same time though, it's also the island of death. You would stumble across bones constantly, so that I think looks like either a penguin or a skua jaw, I can't tell for sure. This penguin in this picture, it's hard to tell, but his face is red and bleeding because he got in a fight with his neighbor. And then it's unfortunate that these 2 pictures ended up so small here. But one day when I was doing observations at Normandy, as we called it, I got to see a sea lion hunt penguin on land, which we did see them hunt in the water. You would kind of see the penguins coming in, and there'd be a moment of attack, and then all of the petrels would come in. But this was on land, and so I'm watching this, chunk of rock, and somewhere out here to the right is where they would go into the water, and that's where I'm counting. And then I suddenly see a sea lion galumphing awkwardly, pretty quickly along the rocks, and all of the penguins just scatter in every direction. And he keeps galumphing along, and he's moving pretty fast. And then here he has a juvenile penguin in his mouth that he just pretty much walked up to and grabbed, because the juvenile penguins are not very smart. And in the previous picture, the juvenile penguin was just standing there like, oh, hey. So it's the island of life, it's the island of death. You get to see the whole circle happening all the time. We would then set up those camera traps with dead bodies, and you would see who gets to come in and eat those. And so it was really just being really immersed in what nature truly is. This, for example, is a picture where I tried to not choose a gory one, but that is a sea lion there, and the vague pink blob under the water is a seal. Luis found this one day. He looked down a cliff and saw it down below, that this sea lion had killed a seal somehow and was slowly tearing it apart and eating it.
It was 2 different species, right?
Yeah, 2 different species. And so these 3 birds that you see in the picture are the petrels that I've talked about. They are scavengers. They will follow behind fishing boats and eat all of the random stuff that they get there. And these guys were basically floating right next to the sea lion as the sea lion shakes apart his prey, and they would come in and grab a bite every time they had the chance. So again, the whole circle of life. It was also very much a situation where you had to be prepared for the unexpected, expect the unexpected at all times. The picture in the top left there is when Maru was taking some invertebrate samples for her research. She fell into the pond, as you do. On the right there, Joaquin is delighted because he had lost 2 pairs of gloves before we got to the island, and then he suddenly found them. And then these bottom 2 pictures are from one day that I was working with him, and we went to go check some Caracara nests, but the tide was too high. And so we had to do some improvised climbing along this cliff edge in order to not have to, swim to the site that we wanted to get to. As well as Joaquin climbing down, and you can't see here, but it's probably a good 20-foot cliff. He's climbing down to a caracara nest, and from there, he reached down and handed me the babies. Then he climbed back up, we banded them, and then he climbed back down and we put them back. So very much every day something new. I put these two pictures in here because they're from the same day where we managed to startle 2 different sea lions. And for anyone who's spent time in bear country, and since I've done a lot of my field work up in Grand Teton and Yellowstone, I'm used to having to think about bears all the time. I think I'm more scared of sea lions. The 2 that we startled were just snoozing in some really tall grass, and so we couldn't see them. And that one on the left in particular, Joaquin was walking past it, and he happened between it and the water, woke it up, it made a big roar, and then started moving towards the water, and it was like a brief moment of panic for everyone until we realized it was just on its way. The second one we startled about an hour later, and we started learning our lesson that when we were in the tall grass, we really needed to watch out for the sea lions. However, despite the fact that for startle factor, they're definitely the scariest, the ones you really gotta watch out for, again, are the striated caracaras. I call this picture the murder face. They would swoop around us whenever we were near their nests, and so we would carry our trekking poles or those posts that we put the camera traps on, kind of angled behind our heads, because they would smack you in the back of your head, full force, with quite a bit of weight. And you didn't want that to happen, so you carry a stick behind your head. And I was doing that one day, they're swooping us, and so I had my stick up behind my head, and I'm like, all right, I'm fine, I have my stick. And then one swooped and smacked me straight in the forehead. Thankfully I had a hat on, so its claws didn't get me, but definitely pulled a thread out of my beanie. And yeah, you had to watch out for the caracaras more than you did for the sea lions. Just a handful more pictures of some of the wild things that we saw. The top right picture there, that is a king penguin. So again, they're smaller than emperors, even though they look really similar. And I'm really jealous because I didn't get to see it in person. Luis did. I was in the lighthouse with an injury because I had thrown my back out the day before. And the king penguin was just what we call a vagrant. And so they don't nest on this island. They really don't like it because it's really rocky, and they prefer sandier beaches. And this penguin just got lost and ended up on the island, and Luis happened to get to see it. And it was probably twice as tall as the Magellanic penguins are. So much bigger, very different species. The bottom
I don't wanna handle those ones.
No.
They're too big.
The bottom left picture is in the middle. There is a bird called a Columbius rail. That was really exciting for me as someone who is interested in birds because they're very secretive birds. It's really hard to get to see them, let alone get a good picture of them. And then just a couple other species. So you have a little guy up there called an Austral negrita. And I love that picture of him because I think he looks like a Stark family member from Game of Thrones preparing for winter with his little red coat. There's a beautiful striated caracara in the middle there, and then that is a South American tern, and terns are just these beautiful, elegant creatures. But I included that picture because I wanted to tell the story of the day that I was just watching a tern, and I was like, oh wow, it's so elegant, and then I saw poop as I was watching it. These are what we call pata pingüinos, which means penguin ducks. This is a little lagoon that was in the middle of the island that just was very muddy, had a few inches of water, and the penguins really like to hang out in it. And it would really crack us up because sometimes you wouldn't see them, and they'd be in the water, more on their stomachs like this, and they just looked like a duck, but it's a penguin. And I think that's just one of those things from this experience. It's you would never imagine a penguin acting like a duck until you're in a place like this for an extended period of time. This was the day that we were waiting to be picked up. So we got the radio call that the sailboat was on the way to get us. We had to lug everything that half kilometer from the lighthouse and then all the way down the cliffside. All of these boxes here that are covered in a trash bag are our trash. We packed everything back out with us. You can see our giant pile of gear there that we have and our crew. And then just to give you a better angle on where we had to haul that gear down from, there's a staircase that goes up by this little building right here, goes up to the right and then to the left, and it ends back up by that old winch that doesn't work, unfortunately. Otherwise, maybe we could have lifted some of our gear that way.
And a little piece of advice: that is the only access to the island because they opened the rocks with TNT.
Yeah, they dynamited this beach to make a beach. Otherwise, it's a sheer cliff face the whole rest of the way around.
It's the rest of the island is inaccessible.
After we got picked up by Hank, our our Dutch sailboat captain, we got to do a little bit of a tourist trip over to Isla de los Estados because he had dropped off another crew there who was just doing a day trip. And so this is the famous lighthouse at the end of the world that inspired Jules Verne's story. Don't go read it. I read it while we were there. I didn't really enjoy it that much. But it's very famous. The French even paid to restore it back in the 90s, and so this is the restored version. We had a great time, our first day off in 3 weeks. We're all just, having a good old time, being tourists. And we got back to the ship and we started prepping dinner for the guys who were in the crew that were coming back that night. And that's kind of where I'll leave it. Just a bit of again, my slides aren't advancing. I don't know why. Well, there should be a penguin picture, but you get all of our smiling faces instead.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah, just kind of a bit of what was it like to live on an island with a bunch of penguins and working with them? Any questions?
So, I'm assuming they introduced the rats.
Yeah, the rats would have also been introduced, though not intentionally the way the
Right.
bunnies were. They would have just come on ships. Yeah.
Were they, because there's no predators other than the birds, right? Were the birds eating the rats?
No, the army take out.
Yeah, they got killed by, they went in and put a ton of
There's a
rat poison
problem.
in.
Because they'd go crazy there.
Mhm.
The long history of the island, in short, is back in the time, like 100 years ago, there was a sailor that rescued a bunch of people in the area because back in that time you don't have the fancy systems or engines. Everything is with sails, right? And there was a bunch of what is the name for
Shipwrecks.
one? Shipwrecks.
Naufragio.
Yeah, and that guy saved a lot of people. This is why the government, the Argentina, give that island to that family as a gift, right? But the family, after that sailor passed away, give that island to the army. But after that, the province of Tierra del Fuego signed a paper or something that island is a national
A state park.
a
Or
state
provincial
park. But at the same time, the federal government said that it's a national park. That means it's a national park, a state park, and private at the same time.
So there's all these conflicting claims to it, and so management is complicated.
This is why it's it's a national park.
Oh yeah, and
right?
then the
We can
Navy
go,
manages the
but
lighthouse
no,
itself.
that depends on the army, and the army is the only one who has access. And even if you have access, the lighthouse belongs to the army. That is the key for the lighthouse, or the access belongs to the army. It's super complicated.
But the Navy, one of the times so they maintained that lighthouse for a long time, and then they stopped, and then they maintained it again for a little bit, and at some point during all of that, they had a concentrated effort to kill all the rats.
So when were you there again? In October?
In December.
In December.
Yeah.
But you said it got dark.
That's what I was gonna ask.
It would get dark pretty late, but sometimes we were up quite late because we were waiting
But
for the
it
high
did get
tide.
dark?
Yes.
That surprises me that
Yeah.
it actually got dark.
We
Yeah,
had
what-
what was it-
it
what
was
was
a
it?
5-hour night probably from we
Okay.
probably had thin light until 1 a.m. And then kind of started to get that thin light again around 4 a.m.
But it's not like you can see the stars,
Mm-mm.
right? It's not that dark.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's all time you have sunlight, and you can see the sun coming out from the south, going around you, and the sunset is almost in the same place.
Yeah.
But you don't have the sun on top of you, never.
What was the latitude you were at? Do you remember? I'm just
Ushuaia-
curious
You
because
can
it
share
seems
the
to me
screen.
like
Ushuaia is
that
at
would be
negative
way-
54,
like a
so
long way down
It's the
there,
same.
right?
yeah,
I think
negative
it's-
54 to negative 56.
Okay, so I was thinking it was farther than that. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
no.
No, Argentina doesn't go as far south as it looks like it does.
Because in Alaska it's 60 degrees,
Mhm.
it's light all day long.
Yeah.
It never gets dark at 60 degrees.
Yeah, I think you have at 4 hours of night,
Okay.
kind of.
Yeah, like I said, kind of that 1 to 5 a.m. range would be mostly dark.
Another piece of information: we carry food for an extra month because that happened before. If you have a storm or for any kind of problem, the sailing boats can pick you up. You're stuck there for another week or maybe 2 weeks or maybe even more.
This was the longest campaign they'd ever done down there, but they had a 5-day campaign once where they got stuck down there an extra week.
Yeah.
And so after that, they learned their lesson to always bring way more food than they needed.
For example, for water, the only access to water is the water that you collect with the snow and raining in the roof.
Yeah,
The
so there's
lighthouse?
this like rainwater cistern that was like in the lighthouse, and so we would use that water, but we still had to filter it because it was not like great quality.
Yeah.
The nice thing was we had a bathroom. We didn't have running water, but we would go outside to the stream and get a bucket of stream water and just throw that down the toilet. And our very last night there, we heated up a bunch of water on the stove and took quick showers so we wouldn't be completely disgusting on the boat, because we're not sure Hank would have let us on board the way we
With
were.
all the pinwing poop.
Yeah, we did not smell good. What else? Yeah, guess.
It looks like a lot of data collection was handwritten. Is
Yes.
that the case? And how did you transfer all of that? Was it like daily?
Not
or?
my job. I did at one point look at Joaquin, who this is his first like big field season for this project, and I was like, are you backing up our data in any way? Like taking pictures of the notebooks, like anything like that? And he's like, no. I was like, do that right now.
And he took some pictures.
Yeah, like the only electricity we had like a small generator that we turned on a few times to charge like some necessary things, but we mostly, a couple of us brought small solar panels for our phones and stuff. But yeah, we couldn't really maintain a computer charge, so we weren't transferring data while we were out there. Joaquin did it all when he got back. But he did start taking pictures on a regular basis after I said
I think
that.
this year they are planning to take one of the satellite internet to keep working during the night, or
Yeah, we had absolutely no connection. Like we had a small like inReach messenger, and so that's the only way we got updates that were like, sailboat's not gonna leave until December 21st, like kind of thing.
How did you like being offline, off grid?
It was fantastic. It was a great time. Like honestly, never. The only time I was bored was when I was stuck in the lighthouse for 3 days because they wouldn't let me out because I hurt my back. But
It's
the
too
rest
risky,
of the time,
it's just
yeah,
too
it was
risky.
right at the end. We had 3 days left, and I like had fallen close to where we climbed that cliff, and so I had to get all the way back to the lighthouse, which was not a fun time. But yeah, the rest of the time it's like we were constantly doing something, and so you're just like occupied, and then like you get back and you're just that kind of tired where you immediately fall asleep. Like it would be a struggle to stay awake because I was like trying to keep my little chronicle of every day going, and like staying awake long enough to finish that sometimes was hard. But yeah, it was really nice. A
Do
little
you
bit
have
stressful at the end. The boat did pick us up like 5 days late, so but
Yeah, we lost
yeah,
our
we missed our
flight.
flight back and everything.
Do you have a picture of the lighthouse? The lighthouse?
Like
Something crazy and historical is they designed that lighthouse in France, I think.
oh, just the lighthouse. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and you can see on the lighthouse is the first part is concrete. This is why they designed the lighthouse to be on top of the island, the highest point possible, right? But another person show up and say, no, that is the place for the magnetic observatory. This is why they moved the lighthouse to a different place, and they kind of adjust the height of
Yeah,
the
they added
lighthouse
that
with
concrete base,
because the lighthouse was already there.
And the reason the magnetic observatory had to be like far away from the lighthouse too is like you can't have any potentially like magnetically active metal near it. And so there's like this spot that we walk past all the time that had a bunch of like ruined planks and stuff, and all the planks had copper nails
Yeah, copper nail.
because that was where the magnetic observatory had been, and so even down to the nails like had to not be a metal that was going to mess with the instrumentation.
Yeah, they were running that observatory for at least 40 years with a full-time crew.
Didn't they have a telegraph installed?
Telegraph,
Yeah.
weather observatory, magnetic observatory.
They had a
and
post office.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind
Really?
that back in that time,
They had a
the
post
only
Well, because all the expeditions would drop off their letters there before going to
not
Antarctica.
only expeditions. Back in that time, is before the Panama Channel. That means the only way to go to the Pacific Ocean is down there.
Either the Beagle Channel or the Strait of Magellan. And I think the Beagle Channel is calmer than the Strait of Magellan is, so some people preferred it, even though it's further south. And so this was like the entrance into the channel. So yeah, like people would drop off their letters and stuff there, and eventually, you know, a boat would come by and they'd send all the letters off.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they had a telegraph installed, and so there were like all these lighthouses all up and down the coast of Argentina that telegraph the weather to Buenos Aires every day.
And you can when you were sailing that, or in your ship, you can radio or telegraph that the screw, and they can give you back the real time to reset your clock, and at the same time you can stop by and take your compass with you, walk inside that house, and they can fix or readjust your compass. And yeah, with the compass and your clock, you can
get a more accurate measure of like your speed
your
and distance
position,
that you're moving.
Yeah, it was an important place
Yeah.
before the 30s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
After the 30s, the Panama Channel was open, and nobody else chose that path. Yeah.
So the really important question is how's the penguin colony health down there?
Pretty decent from my understanding. I don't know if I've seen. Did he do the estimates yet for population density?
No, yet, but
So-
I think it's pretty stable. The only something a little weird, but it's good, I think, is the population of seals is growing fast, but crazy fast.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's just too fast.
Yeah, like
to
if
be
you
real.
read anything about like Antarctic history and like just like the whaling expeditions and then the sealing expeditions that went down to Antarctica before even exploratory expeditions did, like seal populations have recovered pretty well from a lot of like the severe like population bottlenecks they went through, but in some ways they're now almost overpopulated in some places, so there's like some concern with that. We didn't see any signs of avian flu, which was a major concern before we went down there, so that's good.
But for example, if you see the mountains in the back of the back picture, that is the state island. 100 years ago was a really big colony of king penguin, the penguin that we showed the picture.
The one that looks like an emperor.
And that colony was almost completely erased for oil from the same guy that received the island as a gift for rescue.
Yeah.
But back in that time was the right thing, right? Like not the right thing. I can rephrase that. Like what's the business of the industry in that moment? Like 100 years ago, nobody asked like killing the penguins was bad or wrong. What's the industry like any other industry?
Over on the other island too, there's a couple colonies of like some of the rock hopper penguins, so the ones with the eyebrows. And I know that so when we headed out, I think they were still there. There was a documentary crew from Nat Geo like on that island doing a documentary on the penguins over there. So I can't wait to see when that comes out because I'm gonna be like, I was there at the same time. But yeah, they were doing a whole thing on the two rock hopper species that are out there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I was gonna say, so population health, like don't know the exact numbers, seems relatively stable. But we did do, like, it wasn't very photogenic, so I have no pictures of it, but we did these, like, also point estimates of population density, where we had, like, these assigned points that we would go to on the GPS, and then we would measure the distance to the nearest occupied and unoccupied penguin nest, and they'll use that to get a good estimate of both, like, current and potentially historical population density, by using the unoccupied nest as well.
So how many penguins would be on this island?
It is 30,000 pairs, so 60,000 adults, plus all of their
All their
chicks.
babies, yeah.
That is the last estimate.
Yeah,
Or
the
it's
last
only,
time it was estimated, which was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully with the data that we collected, they can update that estimate.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did you know that they needed this counted? And did you write to apply to do this? Or did you know there was an opening and you applied for it?
It was very much like who you know, because I was already down in Argentina doing my research on beavers. I just knew Ulises and happened to mention, I was like, hey, I'd love to tag along on penguin research. And he was like, 3 weeks on an island, you want to come? It was very informal. I think the most formal thing about it was that I think they did add me to like some insurance. And I did have to give my passport to Hank before we left the port because he had to like show who he had on his boat. But other than that, it was very much like, you want to come? You can go. So we did have some jokes though that like if the Navy stopped by, I wasn't allowed to talk. My accent's good, but not that good.
So what about the beavers?
So no beavers on
we
the
gotta
island.
ask a beaver question.
Yes. Well, so what I'm working on is a comparative study of beavers and their native in a novel environment, and I'm looking at what drives connectivity using gene flow. And so essentially I have a bunch of genetic samples, a ton of DNA sequence data, and I'm using that to see like who's most closely related to whom, and is that just explained by proximity, like, you know, more closely related individuals are physically closer together, or does that pattern not hold, and if it doesn't hold, can we relate it to other landscape characteristics? So that's a lot of what my research focuses on. It's called landscape genetics, and so it's looking at that relationship and using it as a proxy for things like movement, dispersal, distribution. And so I'm looking at that both in Yellowstone and Grand Teton area, well, mostly Grand Teton area for my beaver research, and down in Argentina. And the hope is that we can use it to both identify like management and eradication areas in Argentina, as well as to help foster beaver recolonization and translocation here in the States. Because even though our beaver populations have recovered quite a bit from the extreme hunting that they experienced in the 17 and 1800s, there's a lot of areas where we don't have beavers still, and we don't know a lot actually about their movement and some of their basic ecology, and so that's what I'm working on there.
So where do these beavers from Argentina come from?
They came from Manitoba. They were introduced in the 1940s. There were 20 individuals introduced of unknown sex, though presumably there were at least 9 females, based on some previous genetic work. 20 individuals, and now there's the estimates range from 100 to 400,000 beavers. They have reached the continent on the Chilean side, though not many do, so they kill them as soon as they see them, and they're stuck in the archipelago. But they're very destructive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions?